6 American tourists thought they'd found the perfect stunt ambush, a royal guard for a TikTok video. One charged full force, slamming into him from behind. Another stood by filming, waiting for a reaction. A third expected the guard to stumble, maybe hit the ground. To them, he was just part of the background, silent, decorative, harmless. They couldn't have been more wrong. Within 90 seconds, sirens screamed through the square. 3 were on the pavement in zip ties. 2 were pulled aside for questioning, and the royal guard, still standing, still silent, still unshaken. Before we walk you through exactly how a prank turned into a major mistake, hit that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Let's begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Buckingham Palace, its golden rays catching the polished brass buttons and ceremonial rifles of the Queen's Guard. Tourist buses rumbled past Wellington Arch, disgorging camera-wielding visitors who would spend the next hour trying to make the stoic soldiers break character. It was 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September, and Lance Corporal James Mackenzie had been standing at his post for exactly 2 hours and 13 minutes. Mackenzie wasn't just any guardsman. Beneath that towering bearskin hat and scarlet tunic lived the soul of a warrior who had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan's Helmand province. His service record read like a catalogue of hell: improvised explosive devices, sniper fire, and hand-to-hand combat in caves that maps had forgotten. The stillness he displayed wasn't theatrical, it was tactical. Every muscle fiber remained coiled, ready to unleash years of combat training at a moment's notice. The tourists didn't know this, of course. To them, he was just another attraction, a living statue in an elaborate costume. They snapped selfies and made faces, trying desperately to provoke a reaction. Children would tug at their parents' sleeves, asking why the soldier wouldn't smile or wave. Mackenzie had heard it all before. His eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of his bearskin, tracked every movement in his peripheral vision while maintaining the 1,000-yard stare that had become his trademark. 3 young Americans had been circling the palace grounds for the better part of an hour. Brad Hutchinson, a junior at UCLA, with bleached hair and arms covered in fraternity tattoos, led the pack. His companions, Tyler and Josh, were typical spring break stereotypes: backwards baseball caps, designer sneakers that cost more than most people's rent, and phones permanently attached to their hands like digital appendages. They had come to London not for culture or history, but for content. Their TikTok accounts thrived on increasingly dangerous stunts, each video trying to top the last in shock value and recklessness. Brad had been live streaming for his 2.3 million followers since dawn, documenting their epic London adventure, with the kind of manufactured excitement that drove engagement metrics through the roof. The comments section was already filled with fire emojis and skull-laughing faces, his audience hungry for whatever chaos he would unleash next. "All right, brothers," he had announced to his phone camera earlier that morning, "today we're gonna do something absolutely insane. We're gonna mess with the Queen's Guards and see if we can make them break." The plan was simple in its stupidity: charge the guard from behind, jump on his back, and film his reaction. Brad had seen similar videos online, tourists bothering guards in various ways, but none had attempted what he was planning. The thrill of potentially going viral outweighed any consideration of consequences. After all, what were they going to do? These were just actors in costumes, right? Mackenzie's trained ears picked up the conversation before his eyes confirmed the threat. 3 American accents, growing louder and more animated as they approached his position. He had dealt with difficult tourists before: drunken football fans, obnoxious teenagers, even the occasional activist trying to make a political statement. But something about these voices carried a different energy, a reckless abandon that triggered his combat instincts. "Dude, look at this guy." Brad's voice carried across the courtyard as he pointed his phone toward Mackenzie. "He's been standing there for like 2 hours, doesn't even blink. Watch this. Sim gonna jump on his back and see what happens." The phone's front-facing camera captured Brad's grinning face as he explained his plan to his virtual audience. The live-stream viewer count was climbing rapidly: 4,847 people and rising, all waiting to see what would happen next. Tyler, slightly less confident than his friend, voiced a concern that would prove prophetic. "Bro, are you sure about this? These guys are like actual soldiers, right? What if he fights back?" His question was met with dismissive laughter from both Brad and Josh. The idea that someone in a ceremonial uniform could pose any real threat seemed absurd to them. They had grown up in a world where authority figures were content creators, where consequence was just another word for viral fame. Josh, ever the enabler, was already positioning himself for the perfect camera angle. "This is going to be sick, man. My followers are going to lose their minds. Make sure you really commit to it. Half measures don't get views." He held up his own phone, creating a multi-angle documentation of what they believed would be their greatest stunt yet. What none of them realized was that Mackenzie had been tracking their movements for the past 15 minutes. His peripheral vision, honed by years of watching for Taliban fighters in Afghan markets, had catalogued every step they took, every gesture they made. He recognized the pre-attack positioning, the adrenaline-fueled excitement that preceded violence. His body began making micro-adjustments, weight shifting imperceptibly from his heels to the balls of his feet, core muscles tightening, breathing becoming more controlled and deliberate. The irony wasn't lost on him. These privileged college kids, probably spending more on their London vacation than many British families saw in a year, were about to learn a lesson that couldn't be taught in any classroom. They had mistaken ceremony for weakness, tradition for vulnerability. In their world of participation trophies and safe spaces, they had never encountered the kind of disciplined violence that Mackenzie carried within him like a loaded weapon. Detective Sergeant Sarah Collins, watching from her concealed position near the palace gates, noticed the developing situation through her earpiece. Communication with other plainclothes officers stationed round the perimeter. The Met Police took threats to the Royal Guard seriously, and these 3 Americans had been flagged the moment they started their aggressive posturing. "Alpha Team, we have 3 potential hostiles approaching the Central Guard position. American, tourists, early 20s. One is filming what appears to be preparation for an assault." The moment arrived with shocking suddenness. Brad, high on adrenaline and the intoxication of his growing viewer count, made his move. "Here we go, everyone," he shouted to his phone before shoving it into Tyler's hands. With a running start that covered 15 feet of ancient cobblestone, he launched himself at Mackenzie's back like a rugby player attempting a tackle. Time slowed for Mackenzie. His Afghanistan training kicked in with mechanical precision. Wasn't the first time someone had tried to attack him from behind. The weight hitting his shoulders, the amateur grappling attempt, the excited shouts of accomplices, it all triggered muscle memory that had kept him alive through countless fire. But unlike those desert battlefields, here he had to balance lethal capability with appropriate force. This wasn't a Taliban fighter with an AK-47. This was a stupid kid with a camera. Brad's initial triumph those few seconds when he thought he had successfully mounted the unmoving guard lasted exactly 1.3 seconds. That's how long it took Mackenzie to plant his feet, engage his core, and execute a textbook shoulder throw that his hand-to-hand combat instructor would have graded as perfect. The movement was so fluid, so economical, that observers later described it as watching a master craftsman demonstrate his art. The sound Brad made as he flew through the air wasn't the triumphant yell he had practiced in his dorm room. It was the confused, terrified yelp of someone who had catastrophically misjudged their opponent. His trajectory carried him over Mackenzie's right shoulder and down onto the unforgiving cobblestones with a sickening thud that echoed off the palace walls. The crack of his ribs meeting the ground was audible, even over the gasps of horrified tourists. Tyler, still holding Brad's phone with the live stream running, watched his friend's face transform from cocky confidence to bewildered pain. The comment section exploded with fire emojis and crying, laughing faces. Thousands of viewers treating the violence as entertainment. But Tyler, seeing Brad writhing on the ground clutching his chest, felt the first cold fingers of genuine fear creep up his spine. Mackenzie never broke formation. His ceremonial position remained perfect trifle at the precise angle specified by centuries of military tradition. Eyes forward, breathing controlled. The only evidence of what had just occurred was the slight adjustment he made to his tunic, a minor correction that spoke to the discipline that had made him one of the most respected soldiers in his regiment. To the casual observer, it might have appeared that Brad had simply bounced off an immovable object, but the professionals watching knew better. Detective Sergeant Collins had witnessed the entire incident, and what impressed her most wasn't the physical technique though, that had been flawless, but the restraint. Mackenzie could have done far worse. A man with his training could have turned that shoulder throw into something that would have required a morgue rather than an ambulance. Instead, he had used exactly the amount of force necessary to neutralize the threat, while maintaining the dignity of his position. The irony of the situation crystallized in that moment. Brad's phone, still live streaming from Tyler's shaking hands, was broadcasting his humiliation to thousands of viewers who had tuned in expecting to see a British soldier embarrassed. Instead, they were witnessing a masterclass in why you don't attack trained military personnel, even ceremonial ones. The response from the Metropolitan Police was swift and overwhelming. Within 30 seconds of Brad hitting the cobblestones, 6 armed officers emerged from positions that tourists never suspected existed. Their movement was coordinated, professional, and utterly intimidating to the 3 Americans who had been expecting nothing more serious than a stern talking to. Armed police. Get on the ground, now. The commands came from multiple directions simultaneously, a cacophony of authority that left no room for negotiation or explanation. Tyler dropped Brad's phone, the live stream capturing a chaotic view of boots and sky as it clattered across the cobblestones. Josh, who had been filming the entire incident, found his own phone knocked from his hands by an officer who appeared beside him, as if materialized from thin air. Brad, still gasping from his impact with the ground, looked up to see the business end of several firearms pointed in his direction. The pain in his ribs, later diagnosed as 2 fractures and severe bruising, was nothing compared to the terror that flooded his system as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. This wasn't a prank gone wrong. This was a serious security incident at one of the world's most protected locations. Detective Sergeant Collins approached the scene with the measured pace of someone who had handled hundreds of similar situations. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the kind of authority that comes from years of dealing with both genuine threats and attention-seeking idiots. Section 5 of the Public Order Act, she announced, as the handcuffs clicked around Brad's wrists. Assault on a military officer in the performance of his duties. Additionally, we'll be looking at charges under the Terrorism Act 2004, attacking a protected site. The word terrorism hit the 3 friends like a physical blow. In their world of viral videos and consequence-free entertainment, they had never considered that their actions might be viewed through the lens of national security. Brad's face, already pale from pain and shock, went completely white as the implications began to sink in. His dreams of viral fame were rapidly becoming a nightmare of international incident. Tyler and Josh, now also in handcuffs, exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their suddenly precarious situation. The phones that had been documenting their epic adventure were now evidence in a criminal case. The followers who had been encouraging their increasingly dangerous behavior were now witnesses to their spectacular downfall. The university that had provided them with the opportunity to study abroad would soon be fielding calls from the British authorities about their students' conduct. Mackenzie, throughout this entire circus, remained at his post. His eyes never left their forward focus. His rifle never wavered from its prescribed position. But those who knew him well, his fellow guardsmen, his commanding officers, would later note the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested satisfaction. Justice was being served, and the dignity of the Queen's Guard was being maintained. The tourists who had gathered to witness the morning's drama found themselves being moved back by additional officers who had arrived to secure the scene. Many had captured the incident on their own phones, creating multiple angles of evidence that would later prove invaluable in court. But unlike Brad's deliberately antagonistic livestream, these recordings showed the incident from the perspective of shocked observers rather than willing participants. Within an hour of the incident, the 3 Americans found themselves in separate interview rooms at New Scotland Yard, their carefully curated social media personas stripped away along with their shoelaces and belts. The reality of their situation was beginning to penetrate the fog of disbelief that had surrounded them since the handcuffs clicked shut. Detective Inspector Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police with extensive experience in terrorism-related cases, led the interrogation. His approach was methodical, professional, and utterly devastating to any remaining illusions the 3 might have harbored about the severity of their situation. "Let's start with the obvious," he began, placing printed screenshots from their social media accounts on the table. "You planned this attack, documented it, and broadcast it live to thousands of viewers. In the current security climate, that constitutes a terrorist act." Brad, his ribs bound and his face still bearing the imprint of his encounter with the cobblestones, struggled to process the detective's words. But it was just a prank, he protested, his voice cracking with the strain of trying to maintain his innocence. We weren't trying to hurt anyone. We just wanted to see if we could make him move. The detective's expression remained impassive as he flipped through a thick folder containing the evidence against them. Mr. Hutchinson, you physically assaulted a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces while he was performing ceremonial duties at a critical security location. The fact that you filmed it and broadcast it to social media doesn't make it a prank. It makes it a propaganda tool for potential terrorists who might see this as encouragement for similar attacks. The word propaganda hung in the air like a toxic cloud. None of the three had ever considered that their pursuit of viral fame might be viewed as providing material for actual terrorists. In their bubble of privileged ignorance, they had seen only likes, shares, and subscriber counts. The broader implications of their actions, the security concerns, the diplomatic complications, the precedent they were setting for other attention seekers, had never entered their calculations. Tyler, in the adjacent interview room, was facing similar questions from Detective Sergeant Collins. His role as the cameraman, the one who had captured the entire incident on film, made him just as culpable in the eyes of the law. You were aware that your friend intended to physically assault the guard, Collins stated, her tone leaving no room for denial. You positioned yourself to film it, you encouraged him to proceed, and you continued recording even after the assault had taken place. That makes you an accessory before, during, and after the fact. The legal terminology was overwhelming for someone whose greatest previous exposure to the justice system had been traffic tickets and noise complaints from campus security. Tyler's attempts to minimize his involvement, claiming he was just holding the phone, that he hadn't really thought about what Brad was planning to do, crumbled under the weight of evidence that showed clear premeditation and coordination. Josh's interview was perhaps the most damaging of all. His role as the secondary cameraman, capturing different angles of the planned assault, demonstrated a level of organization that contradicted any claims of spontaneous stupidity. Detective Constable Andrew Thompson, reviewing Josh's social media history, discovered a pattern of increasingly dangerous stunts designed to generate viral content. This wasn't your first time planning and executing dangerous pranks, Thompson observed, scrolling through months of archived videos. Your content shows a clear escalation in risk-taking behavior, culminating in today's attack on a military installation. As news of the incident spread through traditional and social media channels, the three Americans discovered that their quest for viral fame had succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. But instead of the celebration and admiration they had sought, they found themselves the subject of international ridicule and condemnation. The story was picked up by major news outlets within hours. CNN ran a segment titled "American Tourists Attack Royal Guard in Viral Video Stunt." The BBC's coverage was more restrained but equally damning, focusing on the security implications of the incident. Fox News, in typical fashion, used the story as an opportunity to discuss broader issues of American behavior abroad, while British tabloids had a field day with headlines like "Yank Prankers Learn Hard Lesson from Queen's Guard." Brad's University, initially unaware of the situation, found itself fielding calls from reporters, parents, and British authorities throughout the day. The Dean of Students, Dr. Patricia Morrison, released a statement distancing the institution from the students' actions while promising full cooperation with the investigation. UCLA does not condone or support behavior that endangers others or brings discredit to our academic community. The statement read, "We are deeply embarrassed by these students' actions and will be reviewing their enrollment status pending the outcome of legal proceedings." The social media response was swift and merciless. Brad's TikTok account, which had boasted 2.3 million followers before the incident, became a magnet for criticism and mockery. Comments poured in from around the world, with British users particularly vocal in their condemnation. "Proper soldier showed you how it's done, you muppet," read one typical response. "Hope you enjoyed your taste of British justice," read another. But it wasn't just social media users expressing outrage. Military veterans organizations on both sides of the Atlantic issued statements condemning the attack and praising restraint. Colonel Robert Harrison Rhett, speaking for the veterans of foreign wars, said these young men demonstrated a shocking disrespect for military service and the traditions that countless soldiers have died to protect. The response was both professional and appropriate. The diplomatic implications were equally serious. The incident occurred during a period of sensitive negotiations between the US and UK regarding trade agreements, and British officials made it clear that they expected the Americans to face the full consequences of their actions. Ambassador Sarah Chen, speaking at a previously scheduled press conference, was forced to address the incident directly. The United States government does not condone the actions of these individuals. We respect the sovereignty of our allies and the dignity of their military institutions. Mackenzie, meanwhile, remained at his post throughout the day, completing his shift with the same professionalism he had displayed during the attack. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, later spoke with pride about his soldiers' conduct. Lance Corporal Mackenzie demonstrated exactly the kind of discipline and restraint we expect from the Queen's Guard. He neutralized a threat while maintaining the dignity of his position and the safety of all involved. The wheels of British justice, once set in motion, proved both thorough and unforgiving. By evening, formal charges had been filed against all three Americans. Brad faced the most serious accusations: assault on a military officer, breach of security at a protected site, and conspiracy to commit acts likely to cause public disorder. Tyler and Josh were charged as accessories, with additional counts related to their filming and distribution of the incident. The Crown Prosecution Service assigned the case to one of their most experienced barristers, Sarah Blackwood QC, whose reputation for prosecuting terrorism-related cases was legendary among London's legal community. Her opening statement to the press was brief but devastating. The defendants planned and executed an attack on a member of Her Majesty's Armed Forces at one of the most symbolically important locations in the United Kingdom. The fact that they filmed and broadcast this attack demonstrates a clear intent to humiliate and undermine British military tradition. We will be seeking the maximum penalties allowed under law. The maximum penalties, as it turned out, were more severe than any of the three had imagined. Under the Public Order Act, 1986, assault on a military officer could result in up to 6 months in prison and a substantial fine. The Terrorism Act 2000 carried potential sentences of up to 10 years for attacks on protected sites. Even the lesser charges related to public disorder and breach of the peace could result in significant jail time and permanent criminal records. Brad's parents, hastily summoned from their comfortable suburban home in California, arrived at Heathrow Airport to find their son's face plastered across newspaper front pages and television screens. The family's retained attorney, Marcus Goldman, had extensive experience in international criminal law, but even he was sobered by the charges his client faced. "This is not a simple case of college hijinks gone wrong," he explained to Brad's distraught parents. "The British authorities are treating this as a serious security breach with potential terrorism implications." The American consulate in London found itself in the awkward position of providing assistance to citizens who had clearly violated British law in a highly public manner. Consular Officer Jennifer Walsh, assigned to the case, made it clear that there were limits to what the US government could or would do. "We will ensure that American citizens receive fair treatment under British law, but we cannot and will not interfere with legitimate legal proceedings. These individuals must face the consequences of their actions." Meanwhile, the evidence against the three continued to mount. Digital forensics experts had recovered not only the live stream footage, but also hours of planning discussions from their social media accounts. Text messages between the three in the days leading up to the incident showed clear premeditation, with Brad specifically researching the best times and locations to approach the guards. Tyler had even scouted camera angles in advance, taking photos of different vantage points around the palace. The prosecution's case was further strengthened by testimony from Mackenzie himself. In a closed session with investigators, the Lance Corporal provided a detailed account of the incident from his perspective, including his assessment of the threat level and his decision-making process during the attack. His military experience and training gave his testimony additional weight, transforming what might have been dismissed as a prank into a clear case of assault on a trained soldier. 3 weeks later, Westminster Magistrates Court was packed with reporters, legal observers, and members of the public curious to see how British justice would handle the viral video incident that had captivated international attention. The three Americans, their designer clothes replaced by ill-fitting court attire, looked dramatically different from the confident young men who had planned their epic prank just a month earlier. District Judge Margaret Thornton, known for her no-nonsense approach to high-profile cases, made her position clear from the outset. This court will not treat serious criminal offenses as mere pranks, regardless of the defendant's nationality or the medium through which their crimes were broadcast. The fact that you chose to humiliate a British soldier on social media does not diminish the severity of your actions, it amplifies them. The prosecution's case, as expected, was overwhelming. Video evidence from multiple angles showed clear premeditation, coordination, and execution of an assault on a military officer. Sarah Blackwood QC's presentation was methodical and devastating, walking the court through each phase of the planned attack while highlighting the defendant's complete disregard for British law and military tradition. Your Honor, Blackwood stated during her closing argument, these defendants came to our country not as respectful visitors seeking to learn about our culture, but as content creators seeking to exploit our traditions for personal gain. They researched their target, planned their attack, and broadcast their crime to the world as if British soldiers were nothing more than props in their social media theater. The defense attorneys, fighting an uphill battle against overwhelming evidence, attempted to portray their clients as naive young men who had made a terrible mistake. Brad's lawyer, Marcus Goldman, argued for leniency based on his client's youth and lack of criminal history. My client deeply regrets his actions and accepts full responsibility for his poor judgment. He came to London as a student, eager to experience British culture, but allowed his desire for social media attention to cloud his better judgment. The judge's response was swift and unambiguous. Mr. Goldman, your client did not merely exercise poor judgment. He planned and executed a physical assault on a member of Her Majesty's armed forces while that soldier was performing his sworn duty. The defendant's age and social media aspirations are not mitigating factors. They are aggravating ones that demonstrate a concerning disrespect for authority and tradition. When the sentences were announced, the courtroom fell silent. Brad, as the primary perpetrator, received 6 months in HMP Pentonville, followed by immediate deportation and a lifetime ban from re-entering the United Kingdom. Tyler and Josh each received 3 months, with similar deportation orders and entry bans. All three were ordered to pay substantial fines covering court costs, medical expenses, and compensation to the Crown for the security resources expended during their arrest and prosecution. The judge's final words to the defendants became the most quoted portion of the proceedings. You came to this country seeking viral fame through the humiliation of others. Instead, you have brought shame upon yourselves, your families, and your nation. Let this serve as a warning to others who might consider British military traditions as fodder for their entertainment. We will protect the dignity of those who serve with the full force of the law. HMP Pentonville, built in 1842 and known for housing some of Britain's most notorious criminals, was a far cry from the comfortable dormitories and fraternity houses the three Americans had called home. Brad, his ribs still aching from his encounter with Mackenzie's combat training, found himself sharing a cell with a career burglar named Tommy, who took great pleasure in explaining exactly what happened to people who attacked British soldiers. You picked the wrong bloke to mess about with, Tommy observed during Brad's first night behind bars. Queen's Guard, that is. Probably seen more action in Afghanistan than you've seen in your entire cushy life. Lucky he didn't snap your neck, really. The reality of his situation, the cold cell, the institutional food, the loss of freedom that he had taken for granted began to penetrate Brad's consciousness in ways that his privileged upbringing had never prepared him for. Tyler and Josh, housed in a different wing of the same facility, were experiencing their own harsh introduction to the British penal system. The phones that had been permanently attached to their hands were now locked away as evidence, their social media accounts suspended pending investigation, their carefully curated online personas destroyed by their own footage of the incident. Back in California, the story continued to generate headlines and consequences. UCLA officially expelled all 3 students, citing their violation of the university's code of conduct and the damage their actions had caused to the institution's reputation. The fraternity that Brad and Tyler belonged to issued a statement, disavowing their actions and stripping them of membership. Josh's planned internship at a major tech company was withdrawn after his criminal conviction made international news. The financial costs were mounting as well. Legal fees for all 3 defendants exceeded $200,000, most of it borrowed against their families' assets. The fines imposed by the British court added another $75,000 to the total. medical bills for Brad's injuries, while covered by the NHS during his incarceration, would be billed to his family upon his deportation. The true cost of their 15 minutes of infamy was approaching $500,000, a staggering sum for what they had convinced themselves was a harmless prank. Mackenzie, meanwhile, had become something of a celebrity within military circles. His handling of the incident was used as a case study in military academies and police training facilities, demonstrating how to neutralize a threat while maintaining professional composure. He received commendations from his commanding officers and letters of support from veterans organizations around the world. But perhaps more importantly, the incident had sparked a broader conversation about the treatment of military personnel and the responsibility of social media platforms to prevent the incitement of dangerous behavior. Several major platforms updated their community guidelines to explicitly prohibit content that encouraged harassment or assault of military or law enforcement personnel. The video of Brad's spectacular failure, ironically, did achieve the viral status he had sought, but not in the way he had intended. It became a cautionary tale shared by parents, educators, and military personnel as an example of how the pursuit of online fame could lead to real-world consequences. The clip was viewed over 50 million times across various platforms, but the comment sections were filled not with admiration but with mockery and condemnation. 6 months later, as Brad walked out of HMP Pentonville and directly onto a deportation flight to Los Angeles, he was a fundamentally changed person. The confident, attention-seeking college student who had planned to humiliate a British soldier had been replaced by someone who understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, that actions have consequences. The media was waiting at LAX when his flight landed, but Brad had learned to avoid cameras rather than seek them out. His brief, the statement to reporters was humble and contrite. "I deeply regret my actions in London. I disrespected a soldier who was serving his country, and I embarrassed my own country in the process. I accept full responsibility for my poor judgment and the consequences that followed." Tyler and Josh, released a month earlier due to their lesser sentences, had already begun the difficult process of rebuilding their lives. Both had enrolled in community college. Their dreams of returning to prestigious four-year universities ended by their criminal convictions. Tyler had taken a job at his father's construction company, learning for the first time what physical labor felt like. Josh was working at a local coffee shop, serving customers who occasionally recognized him from the viral video of his downfall. The long-term consequences of their actions continued to unfold. All three found themselves virtually unemployable. In any field requiring background checks, graduate school applications were automatically rejected due to their criminal records. Dating became complicated when potential partners Googled their names and found stories about their assault on a British soldier. Their families, too, bore lasting scars from the incident. Brad's parents, once proud of their successful son's social media following, now cringed whenever they heard about viral videos or social media pranks. The legal bills had forced them to remortgage their home, and their retirement plans were pushed back by years. Tyler's younger sister, a high school senior, found her own college applications questioned due to her brother's notoriety. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on their understanding of respect, consequence, and the difference between entertainment and reality. The bubble of privilege that had insulated them from the real world had been permanently burst by the measured, professional response of a British soldier who had treated their attack not as a joke but as a genuine threat requiring appropriate force. Mackenzie, now promoted to corporal for his exemplary conduct during the incident, continued his duties with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized his response to the attack. He never spoke publicly about the incident beyond his official testimony, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. To his fellow guardsmen, he had become a symbol of what it meant to serve with honor, maintaining discipline and dignity, even when faced with those who would mock the uniform. The incident also sparked changes in security protocols at royal residences. While the specific details remained classified, it was clear that the response to future incidents would be even more swift and decisive. Tourist behavior around the guards became noticeably more respectful, as word spread through travel forums and guidebooks about the serious consequences that could result from treating soldiers as entertainment. In the end, the story of three Americans who thought they could humiliate a British soldier for viral fame became a modern parable about respect, consequence, and the difference between virtual and actual reality. Their 15 minutes of fame had indeed gone viral, but as a cautionary tale rather than the triumphant content they had envisioned. The royal guard stood at his post, as guards had for centuries before him and would for centuries to come. The traditions he protected had survived wars, revolutions, and the changing tides of history. They would certainly survive 3 foolish young men with cameras, just as they had survived countless other challenges to their dignity and purpose. And, in the end, that may have been the most important lesson of all. Some things are bigger than social media, more lasting than viral fame, and more worthy of respect than the fleeting attention of strangers on the internet. The 3 Americans had learned this lesson the hard way, in a British courtroom and a London prison, but they had learned it nonetheless. The story ended not with sirens taking over the square, but with the quiet restoration of order, dignity, and respect for those who serve. And perhaps, in a world increasingly dominated by the pursuit of viral fame over substance, that was the most important ending of all.